Hello and welcome to another edition of Fide's podcast. My name is Jerry Serino and I'm your host, and I'm here with talent on loan from Rush. I'm also here with another fellow podcaster and writer, Jeff Charles, and he has joined me today to talk about some all that he's doing and some of the other things going on. So, Jeff, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. So tell me about your podcast. You have a show called A Fresh Perspective. What's it all about?
Yeah, so it's a political podcast, and I tend to my goal with a fresh perspective is really in the name to provide a fresh perspective on the news and the issues of the day concerning politics, culture, and all that good stuff. I like to take a deeper dive into a lot of these things because one of the problems that I've seen as a political commentator. Even in my writing and in other areas, I've just seen a lot of people tend to have a very superficial take on the news, or you watch your cable news and there's an issue being debated, but people only get like 10 seconds to talk, so you can't really drill down. And I think
Mhm.
what people really do want is a more superficial, or I'm sorry, or a more deeper dive into these issues, deeper conversations, and conversations, frankly, by influencers who are not just there to tell them what they want to hear. They want people who will tell them the truth as they see it, whether they agree with it or not. And the guests that I have on my show tend to go deeper on these issues. And when I do my podcast by myself, same thing. So I really, my goal is to bring more fresh perspectives to my audience that they may not normally hear, and have them drill down on some of this stuff more deeply.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So who are some of the guests that have been your favorite? I know you don't want to always, exclude anybody else because I'm sure they're all excellent. But if any maybe had more impact, or topics maybe is a better question, that have been more impactful to you.
Oh man, I've had so many. It's like asking to choose my favorite kid. I mean, come on now.
Yeah.
No, one of my favorites is a lady named Megan Allman, and she is a pro-life apologist. And the abortion debate is always prevalent and front and center.
Hmm.
It's always controversial. But when I had her on my show, I mean, this is what she does for a living. Like, she goes to different venues and talks about and gives the pro life argument, not just from a Christian perspective, but also from a scientific perspective, an ethics perspective. And I got to learn more about what she and other people like her do. And I got to kind of go over some of the arguments that are used, and really how to frame the debate in a way that focuses on what it should focus on. So I really enjoyed her. I've had this guy on two times. His name is King Randall, and what he does, he just created a boarding school in Albany, Georgia, specifically for disadvantaged Black children in the juvenile system. And just talking about his journey with helping to change these kids' lives, he's using an approach that really should be used nationwide, but for some reason it's not. So I like talking to these types of people because they teach me things, but they also teach my audience things too, and bring certain things to the forefront that people don't think about.
Yeah, that's great. I know I've gained so much perspective and learned so much from my guests, and admire and appreciate them so much. So you're also working on a book. Are you finishing up a book that you're going to publish? Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. My goal is to have it published on the 13th of this month. I had to push it back a little bit, but it's called "Chasing Liberty: A Journey from Partisan Politics to the Fight for Freedom." And really, it details my journey. But it's
Hmm.
also for people who are disaffected with their party as well. As a commentator, my focus was mainly on the Republican Party and trying to help it reform. I didn't consider myself to be a card carrying Republican, but as a libertarian leaning person, even in the conservative space, I recognize that the party doesn't live up to what it says it does, and I thought that
Hmm.
the path to liberty would be trying to take over this flawed party and making it into something better. But last December, I realized that that wasn't the way to go. And so I decided to embrace my libertarianness. And now I'm focusing more on the liberty movement itself, not necessarily the party, although I am working with some of those people. I'm focusing more on the liberty movement and specifically pushing that at the local level rather than hyper focusing on the federal and state level. So really the book is for people who may be disaffected Republicans or even disaffected Democrats who want to shrink the size of government and who want the government to have less of a role in their lives, but they don't know what to do because their voices don't really count at the federal and to a lesser extent even at the state level. So it's really a kind of a here's what is the book is basically saying, this is what I'm doing. Here's how you can get involved and how your voice can count.
Yeah, that sounds like a great topic because I think you're right. I'm a Republican, but they frustrate me maybe more than the Democrats do in a way.
Yes.
So it sounds like a real interesting read. Where can people find it when it comes out or even pre-order it?
So if you go to my Substack, which is also called Chasing Liberty, chasingliberty.substack.com, or you can look on my Twitter page, which is at Jeff Charles Jr. You can find out how to
Mhm.
pre-order the book. When it comes out, it's going to be on Amazon, print copy and ebook as well.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're watching, you could see Jeff's Twitter handle at Jeff Charles Jr. Jr. You could go connect there and you could find everything there. So tell me, it sounds like maybe you discussed this in your book a little bit, so we don't want to give too much of it away, but tell me about your background. How were you
Mhm.
raised? What was your upbringing like? And what brought you, if anything, brought you to the point of getting politically active or involved?
Sure. So I s- well, when I was younger, I was more of a Democrat. I started getting more or paying more attention to politics after 9/11. I paid attention before, but not as much. I started hyper
Mhm.
focusing on it. And I've always, since then, I've been very political. And I was more on the Democrat side by then, at that point, but only by default, just because, I mean, I was born and raised in Southern California. The wars were happening. Everybody hated Bush, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, yeah. So I just kind
Yeah.
of leaned more Democrat, but I was never really a leftist. I'm not even sure if I'd even have called myself much of a liberal. Like I was still pro-life. I still believed in all of that, and I didn't know much about the differences between liberalism and conservatism, and I definitely didn't know anything about libertarianism. But the way I was raised was always more conservative, and if, in fact, one of the things that turned me off to Democrats was this victimhood mentality that they would try to place on me because I'm a black man, and you know how they
Mhm.
do, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
can't make it in life because of racism, and it's not to say I don't believe that racism doesn't have an impact, and I do believe systemic racism exists, although I don't believe the narrative coming from progressives about it. But as a child, that mindset was never modeled for me. My mom was very driven, and she worked while raising me, and made it to the upper echelons of corporate America. So that those messages never resonated for me. So my evolution started to happen, especially when I had a job where I used to drive all the time. And I would listen to talk radio. So I listened to Dennis Prager, Michael Medved, Hugh Hewitt, some of the others. Never really got into Rush, though. I mean, I listened to a show a little bit, but it was more the others that really resonated more with me. And I would argue with them. I'd be arguing with them like in my
Mhm.
car,
Mhm.
just on my own, looking like a crazy person.
Yeah.
But most of the stuff they would say, I would agree with. And as time went on, I realized, I have more in common. Even though I don't agree with everything, I have way more in common with people who say they're conservative than people who say they're liberal. So at that point, I became more of a conservative, and I've only voted Democrat once in 2004 for John Kerry, but after that, I would vote Republicans again, even though I didn't really consider myself a card carrying Republican. But then even then, I started going through um, another evolution. And that's where I started realizing that my beliefs were starting to look more like libertarian beliefs. But I knew that there were also a lot of libertarians in the Republican Party. And I think libertarianism has had an influence on the Republican Party and the conservative movement especially over the past decade or so. I started writing for a site called Liberty Nation in 2017. I still write for them, and that's when I really started doing political commentary professionally. And by then, I kind of call myself a conservatarian, just to kind of make it try to make it easier for people to get where I'm coming from, because people still get confused about where I stand politically, because
Mhm.
I'll go after both sides, but I always leaned more libertarian. I didn't see the liberty movement or the Libertarian Party as an option because, frankly, it wasn't anything to be taken seriously. They weren't really taking themselves seriously, in my opinion. That's kind of changed a little bit now, but uh, in 2017, that's when I started, and then that's kind of where my journey continued up to the point to where I am right now.
Excellent. So, you've referenced libertarianism a lot, and your disillusion with the Republican Party, which I don't consider myself a libertarian, although there's definitely some similarities. I'm certain.
Oh yeah.
What some beliefs that you have as a libertarian that that maybe differ from the Republicans?
Mm. So I would say, I mean, as a libertarian, I believe that the government's role, their primary role, 90% of what they should be doing is protecting our natural rights.
Hmm.
So if somebody is engaging in a behavior that doesn't violate someone else's rights, it shouldn't be a crime. Now, I may personally believe that it's immoral, but I don't want to send men with guns and badges to throw them in cages for it. Drugs is always the example that comes up, right? I mean, I've had family members have their lives ruined by drugs, but I don't see the government throwing them in cages as a solution. And the war on drugs is a proven failure. And there are other methods that outside of government that can work, especially as Christians. I mean,
Hmm.
I believe like a church, a Christian community will do more to get people off of drugs than a government arresting them and throwing them in prison. So I think that's one area where I differ from conservatives, although I do see more conservatives kind of coming around to that way of thinking. Another area, I suppose, would be when it comes to law enforcement and the police. And that kind of ties in
Hmm.
because I don't believe when a police officer abuses their authority, there should be no knee jerk reaction to defend them or to, do back the blue. Do that
Sure.
with the good police officers, definitely. But I've just noticed all throughout, when I've been in the conservative movement, that there is a very streak of a very distinct streak of supporting the police to the point to where we will gloss over their flaws and flaws
Hmm.
even within the system of policing as well. So I mean that's one area where I did where where I don't really line up. I, it's hard to think of others because there is a lot of overlap between libertarianism
Sure.
and conservatism. I would say, as far as foreign entanglements, I'm against unnecessary wars. And
Hmm.
nowadays, conservatives are a lot of conservatives are at that point too, but that hasn't always been the case, right? I mean, back during the
Hmm.
Bush years, and I was one of them. Had a lot of those neocon beliefs where we should be trying to nation build and do all this stuff. A lot of them supported the Patriot Act, which I would never support today. So I think that when it comes to that area, I think that there's more alignment there. But I think there's that neocon issue still exists. It's just more diminished. Thank God.
Yeah, well, I was with you with the Iraq War. I supported it, and
Mhm.
it's tough to eat crow, but I realized that it was wrong in the sense it was unnecessary, right? I mean, we were all emotional after 9/11, and I get that,
Yeah.
but and what going in Ukraine, I have this belief that virtually all wars are caused by incompetent corrupt politicians, right?
Yeah.
Like what's happening in Ukraine really didn't even shouldn't have happened, but our corruption in our government and failure has, in my opinion, caused this. But anyways, okay. So as we somewhat come to the end here, what are and maybe they're the issues that you just talked about. What do you think are the greatest challenges country faces today?
Jerry, I mean, there's a lot of them, but one of the
Hmm.
biggest is the fact that the federal government is growing and growing and growing
Hmm.
under Republican and Democrat control. I mean, under Trump, federal government went from 9 million employees to 11 million. And it's going to grow even more under Biden. It's already doing that. It's becoming
Hmm.
more intrusive. And one of the biggest problems is that as a society, we focus mostly on the federal government, Congress, the presidency. It wasn't always like that. It was never meant to be
Hmm.
that way. And that's what allowed us to be in this position. I think the biggest issue is that we are not focusing on the governments that are closest to us. And we
Mhm.
lost the sense of knowing that your mayor has more of a direct impact on your life than the president does. Your city council has more of a direct impact on your life than Congress does. And this has allowed the government to grow to the point to where it's doing some very unsavory things. We saw what happened under COVID, right?
Mhm.
And then we also saw a lot of sheriffs who said, I'm not going to enforce these lockdown orders. That's why local government is so
Mhm.
important, because when the federal government and even the state government wants to overreach and violate our rights, it's your sheriff, your judges, your city council, your mayors that are able to stand up to that. So I would say that, and I think just a lot of people are really accepting a lot of the authoritarianism that's going on, as long as it's their team doing it and not the other team. The biggest danger is that we are looking at things in terms of left and right, Democrat, Republican, black and white.
Mhm.
Really, it's not left versus right. It's liberty versus authoritarianism. And I don't care if you're on the left. If you are going to fight back against authoritarianism, I'm with you. And that's what I mean by focusing on liberty over party. I can
Mhm.
support a candidate even if they have an R next to their name or an I or an L, as long as I know they're going to fight for liberty and against government overreach. And I think that there's not enough of that yet, although I do think that's starting to change.
Yeah, agree with you 100%. I really love that perspective. I don't think enough people are focusing on the size of government as the overall problem. I mean, there are sub problems that stem from that, right? The impact on the economy, our freedoms, foreign wars, and the like you said. Yeah, I think that's really, really insightful and 100% agree. So if that, if you're listening and that's you, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever you want to call yourself, as Jeff said, look at the issue, look at the person and what they're advocating for, and that's who we need to support and get involved locally. Really well said. Really well said. So, remind us again the title of your upcoming book.
Yeah, the title is Chasing Liberty, A Journey from Partisan Politics to the Fight for Freedom. And that's also the same name as my Substack. It's called Chasing Liberty. And I've got a post on there telling you how you can place a pre order. And that's also on Twitter as well. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Charles Jr.
Yes, and I was actually on your Twitter, so the book that you have the cover, it looks really nice. It's there. Please check out at Jeff Charles Jr. I'm a junior as well, Jeff.
Nice.
So appreciate that. But really, really great stuff. Really insightful. I loved the libertarian of things is something we don't understand enough, and I think we more we do, the more we realize we're more like that than quote unquote conservative per
Definitely.
se, right? And it's very uh, it's something worth looking into. And Jeff is someone worth looking into as well. If you haven't already, checking out his podcast, his book, and just following him on Twitter, and listen and hear his perspectives in writing. So, Jeff Charles, thank you so much, man. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank all of you for listening to this episode of Fide's Podcast. Please check out all my podcasts and all the different podcast apps on YouTube, on Rumble, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern on rightamericanmedia.com. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.